6 minutes, 6 minutes after the program, I would suggest that the session, we were having a break. It's 5 presentations, shorter than the morning ones, but it's 15 minutes each. So I would suggest, let's run all through, no break, and to really enjoy the presentations, and to not break through the inertia, the dynamics of this, because we have presentations and experiences to share from the entire continent, Central America, North America, and Mexico. And I can assure you it's very, very interesting, and I'm very pleased to introduce our next guest that will be sharing these experiences with us. As an introduction, I just want to remind you what Edwin was telling us at the very beginning of our session today. What were the purposes, the main purposes of these sessions that we have called Conservation Beyond Frontiers, and also the PIF mission, which is basically to continue to share our experiences in the different ways that each country or each initiative has to interpret the conservationist works. And it's important also that all these experiences are contributing to the conservation of the different ecosystems, as well as birds. Not everyone presenting now are actually members. And so our invitation remains wide open to join partners in flight, and just to give us a yes, and let's just continue to work together, because we're achieving a whole lot right now, even as we speak. So, and also the intention to invite these other countries that have not been represented in the same level, and to understand what they're doing, what their efforts are from different initiatives or different countries, and to bring that to the network, into the network where which we belong to. And I'm very pleased now to introduce Gabi Fuentes, that is here to talk to us about the network of observations, Amazilias network observance in Mexico. Thank you all. Good afternoon. I'm going to start sharing my screen. And I'm going to amplify now. I hope you can see it. Yes, can you see it? Can you hear me? Wonderful. I think it's still loading. There we go. So thank you all for Partners in Flight to allow me the space to share, and especially it's all the Amazilias members. That's our own name for all the members of the network, to honor me to speak on behalf of everyone. And with this presentation, we decided to tell the women soaring up for birds conservation. And I'm going to explain who Amazilias is, who is behind, what are our goals, what's been our background, even though it's short, and how do we organize ourselves. Also, I'm going to be sharing some of the solid and concrete actions that some Amazilias have been implementing to address priority species. I'm going to try and pretend that I'm not reading, but because we have only so much time, I'm going to have to read some of it. So before anything, I'd like to start with the acknowledgement that Amazilias recognizes all women who have preceded us, and those who have been there for us in any field or different aspects of social life. To all those women that have led us to forge our paths, and for this moment to become a reality in which we share our interests and concerns for bird protection. So who are we, and what are we doing here? Amazilias we identify as a network of female observers to promote the actions conducted by young girls and women in around the world, and to transform the panoramic the perspective, integrating everyone in a collective level. And the mission is to promote a network of autonomous work from women on the benefit of birds and the communities around them. Amazilias was born in September 2019 throughout a meeting of coordinators for urban birds protection in the state of Mexico with POW. And in that time, Ms. Sanchez, from the coordinator of POW, she called in all the women that were at that time present. Even though the objectives were not exactly clear, a lot of us were decided to attend. In almost 3 years, we conducted our sessions online. And first of all, because we were all in different states. And then secondly, of course, because of the pandemic restrictions. But on this, during this online sessions, we started building our identity. We also went by girl power to begin with, but then we decided to change our name to Amazilias. And I would like to make a special mention Ana Maria Sabarino, also part of Amazilias, who designed our logo and all the projects as well, as you will be able to see further ahead. And then in this online session, we created our directory and our organizational chart. We invited other ladies to train us. And then eventually we started participating in different online events and continue to invite other women and conducting virtual trainings for young girls, young teenagers and women to participate, to take part in this kind of online events, as you can see in the screen. Now, how many of us are there? 69. The network is formed by 69 ladies from different, from 36 cities and in all 19 different states of Mexico. You can see that in the map, and then in this graphic, you can look at the diversity of the profiles. Nearly 20% are professors, are researchers, or students. Another great percentage is women who work for government agencies and civil groups, and the scientific promotion and divulgation, and to promote also projects related to birds, and also women who conduct independent projects, entrepreneurs that have reorganized on cooperatives on different groups. And this one is a little bit about our organization. The first one was a circular, as you can see in the upper left corner. And currently we're holding a scheme that's a little more horizontal, that decentralizes some of the tasks, and that we're able to group ourselves or cluster ourselves into different groups, or if in different interests. 4 of these are called commissions, and 2 more are general projects, and 1 small group, which is a facilitator. And I'm very quickly sharing who are we. After big actions, there's always big women, right? And it's important to understand who they are. The coordination is in the hands of a general coordinator, Patricia Hernandez. So maybe someone already knows who this is. And also an auxiliary coordinator, Pamela Garcia. And these positions will be held for 2 years. Facilitators, also known for Commission of Events, is represented by Itzel and Roxana. This commission is in charge of PR and the agenda and the scheduling of events. And due to the time, I'm not gonna talk much about the solid results or the impacts or the expected impact that we would like to have out of these each one of these objectives, but they're included in this presentation that you're watching. The commission, Amazilias in your community, is represented by 5 of our members: Morelia, Daphne, Sarai, who you already know, and also Patricia and Olivia. In this commission, we have had 33 participants from 2 different states of the country, and it holds the objectives to promote the creation of female birder groups based on to triple their capacity all over the country. The coordination, there's a coordination for bird tourism or bird watching, and that's represented by me, Sophia, and Lisi, and we have had 28 participants from 11 different states in the country, and to consolidate the network of women capable to manage in an integral level in a strategical way to generate financial benefits, social and cultural benefits, as well as environmental reasons. Another commission is the reinforcement of capacity or capacity building, and which has already had a participation in 2 different collectives. The community participants from Chinaloa, Charas, and the Chachitlique women collective movement from Mexico City. Their objective is to reinforce the skills and for bird watching and community development to visualize the contribution of women in science and conservation. And also, finally, the Commission of Feminism, which is to promote the perspective of feminists, the feminist perspective through new learnings and the change of paradigms in terms of the knowledge and through talks and forums to debate. So 2 projects, 2 general projects that are not necessarily changing the objectives, and sometimes the members, the Amazilias members and the project the Girls in Flight was the first project launched online. And so far we have 21 participants. Their objective is to train young girls from 12 to 14 years old to develop skills in terms of science, conservation, and to promote the observing of the fauna and the environmental culture in their own communities, in their own regions. And the other general project in the national meetings or encounters, this project is also represented by me and Gabi Burguete and other Amazilias that are located right here in Chiapas. We call ourselves Amazilias Chiapenses, which is rather our own nickname. It doesn't exist as a species. But the general objective of this commission is to organize the second meeting here in Chiapas, maybe as a venue, the reserve of La Encrucijada and or the national park here in Chiapas. And then the general objective of this national encounters or national meetings is to reinforce a collaboration among us and to generate a positive impact wherever our actions are taking place, and through different trainings and exchanges of different experience with other local women. I also would like to just have an intervention here. I want to thank those who have supported us in the realization of the creation of this, the Girls in Flights, going for the second generation of girls from this. And the first encounter, the first meeting that we conducted that took place in Jalisco. Now I'm going to share some of the solid or concrete actions that some of our Amazilian members have implemented in terms of the conservation of birds. This information was obtained through a survey, a very quick survey on the species that we find on the ACAB database, and that Amazilias have incorporated in different activities that promote their conservation. In this survey, a very quick result, we have these results. Gisela from Mazatlan, Sinaloa, she has conducted registration of a lot of these species. She's been monitoring them, including in fund activities. Luz Rodriguez from San Cristobal de las Casas in Chiapas, she's participated in different projects of Pronatura Sur, which is the umbrella for a lot of different species also mentioned in the list. Sarai Contreras, and among other things, a long list from Jalisco. She's been working on the restoration of habitats through prescribed ways to different regions and habitats. Araceli Zumpango in the state of Mexico has monitored some of the reproductive areas. Also has taken a number of photographs and for scientific illustration, and has named some of the species for different festivals. Olivia from Jalisco, she's shown different species, and she has printed them on different products to through under a series of photographs that she has created. Yvette from the state of Veracruz also has worked with the different migratory species. And also Itzel Arista in Quintana Roo, she has collaborated in the local guides for birds at a local level to promote the value of Cozumel Island as a habitat and a feeding spot and an mating area and the resting point for a lot of these birds. Pamela Garcia from Mexico City, and out of a long list of different activities, she promotes the science and she makes more emphasis on urban species and the tours she organizes. Or Daphne from Jalisco has worked with Sita pygmea and also Morelia Amante from Michoacan. She works with Cordelina pusilla, the Wilson warbler. Joanna, also in Aguacapan in Outlan in Jalisco, the state of Jalisco, have chosen the Rufus hummingbird. And Roxana from Tapachula, Chiapas has also selected specific species. It's Northern Patu as the start of the festival. And this is about to record for radio and social media to promote the conservation of this particular species. And what as I had mentioned before, this is just a small sample of all the work that some of the Amazilias have conducted in terms of the conservation, the bird conservation and priority. And we are absolutely convinced that a lot more women are also doing a lot of different tasks on conservation in different areas. This bird conservation is one of the big drives that we share with Partners in Flight. We are trying to prioritize some of the species to design in a collective way very specific strategics in terms of conservation. And for us, this collaborative work is only starting. The creation of the different commissions and I have just shown you, and the consolidation of our general projects is only the first step. We also believe that under the management of these skills and virtues, we can create training spaces and opportunities for a lot more women. So on behalf of all Amazilias, we thank you for your interest and your time, and we hope to meet you sometime very soon in this long journey for the conservation of birds. I'm going to leave it to our networks. Thank you so much for your attention. It was very impressive. Thank you, Gabi. And anyone has very good timing, Gabi, by the way. Anyone has any? Becky Stewart is saying, it's awesome. Congratulations, Amasilia. So you're doing a great job. I want to ask you, Gabi, if any girl has shown any interest in how do you go about joining you? It's to get in contact with us. That's why I'm leaving our networks, our Gmail address. This is a network, a national network. Women who are living in Mexico, they know the area, they know the region, they're familiar with it, and we can work together as a team. This doesn't mean that maybe the network will go beyond the borders. But for right now, just for the time being, we will continue to do. It's to live in Mexico is basically the only requirement, and to get in contact with us. That's awesome. Thank you very much. So I thank you, and congratulations to Gabby. This is really inspirational, and I love that this young girls training courses to start introducing them on the bird observation interest. And thank you so much for sharing this with us. Thank you all. All right, now we have one more presentation. Candy Alvarado, who's the director of MOCAV on the board of protected areas management from Honduras. Candy, thank you for your time today. Good afternoon. Just making sure that you can see my, yes, we can hear you. We can hear you and we can see it. Just to please select a slideshow. Oh, go ahead. Good afternoon, everyone. We're gonna set the clock. Just give me 1 second. Greetings from Honduras. We're on the west of the country, and one of the intentions that we have it's to get you to familiarize yourselves with the works that we're doing as a civil society over the last 30 years to develop different actions, a number of actions to protect on the protected areas in Honduras. And in the screen, you can see our logo for the national system for protected areas in Honduras. And this is what we have been able to achieve as MOCAP. In consideration, we're a proud member of the Alliance for the Conservation of Pine Trees and Oak Trees in Central America. And so we have a very peculiar slogan in our country about the process of conservation. It's that each protected area is a story that is being told by the kindness of Mother Nature. And this approach is what we try to apply on the extension of geographical extension on our territory. In the environmental, it's nearly 3.5 hectares that represent more than 46% of the national territory, both for conservation in maritime areas. And in this case, our graphic representation is the 2%, the 62% and 38%, very closely to the maritime environment. Nearly 30% of the Honduras population directly or indirectly has a beneficiary, becomes a beneficiary of the results of these areas. And it is important to highlight nearly 96% of the surface of the APS with a legislative mandate will have an instrument within the development of this protected area. But the state and the Institute for Conservation is the responsible to develop all the different processes not to create a concept.
To formalize the eco management or shared eco management as it is understood in each of the countries. In this case, it was done through signing up to managing contracts through a stakeholder, which could be either the municipality, communities, or civil organization, and they provide the protected network so they can identify and strengthen their concepts of sustainable management. And this way, many of these organizations in 2007 created this figure, MOCAP, because they realized that all of them were in the region of Honduras, but none of them had a voice that could represent them at a political level and at the levels that we needed as a conservation forum. In the last 30 years and the management and conservation of the protected areas, the management from the civil society has allowed us to learn the following. One, that the protected areas are also affected by climate change, something that many of our politicians hadn't considered 10 years ago. And also, we are not considering them as isolated areas or like islands. Within our national protected area system, we have over 2,800 communities, over about 500,000 habit people living there, and about 60% of the activities that are carried out are agriculture. And they are mainly carried out by women. And also, we have identified that there is an inequality in the access of the ownership of the land and the control of natural resources. For example, we have youth that do not have access to economic opportunities to be able to develop within their territories. And in this way, we've seen that it is time to work with a concept that we call sustainable landscape. And maybe you're asking yourself, well, why are you talking about statistics? Because here is where we can identify where we are heading, and this is how we learn how to develop different types of projects in the country. So now I want to tell you a little bit about the history of MOCAP. In 2007, we created our organization. It's comprised by 25 civil organizations. And in 2008, we were acknowledged, we were recognized thanks to the forest law. And that way we are able to have a better incidence in political aspects, and we can start talking about sustainability from the economic perspective and talking about transparency and development. In 2013, we become a moral person, and that's the status that we have maintained until 2015. And so all of this is keeping in mind that we want to be entrepreneurs and be able to implement strategic programs that can be applied to the 91 areas in Honduras. And right now we we own the only program of applying resources to be able to protect these areas. This way we get funding to hire people that we can distribute within different areas. And we are part of the Mesoamerican Alliance of Pine Trees. And we also work with ecosystem restoration. And between 2014 and 2017, about 70% of our pine forests were affected by a plague. So we also participate in political decisions as a forestry council at a national level. And the focus is to strengthen and accompany organizations that are members so they can co-manage the conservation actions. And our vision is to become a leader in the in creating political programs to assure the participation of these organizations. These are the organizations that focus on the Caribbean areas of the country. Also, we have the east side of Honduras, the central part of Honduras, and in the central part of Honduras, we have the oldest organizations focusing on natural resource management. And we also have some members in the west side of the country. How do we work together? Well, we've been able to stand out in these conservation efforts thanks to this, because we discovered that in order to continue supporting the management of protected areas, we need to focus on three main points. One, that the protected areas need to be managed from the perspective of conservation, landscapes, and productive landscapes. So we want to communicate the message that it is not necessary to destroy the ecosystem, because the ecosystem can generate resources that can give them financial security. Also, that anything that we do should be focused on green businesses and jobs, and that helps us to achieve the goals for 2030 as a country to assure food production in a sustainable way. And also the communities, the local communities and authorities are going to be able to have governance over their own territories, because as civil organizations, we are transitory. So we need to start working along with the communities and make sure that every action that we carry out is under their control. Some examples of productive landscapes and sustainable landscapes are here. Every time that we have restoration campaigns, they are the ones that respond to our calling first. So our funding is always directed to locate the strategic points and send our best resources there. And we also focus on gathering all of the knowledge that we need so we can face any difficulty within the protected areas. We also work with environmental education. We teach children and youth about green entrepreneurship. And each of the photographs that you can see on the slides were taken by the members of MOCAP, because we all keep these three goals in mind so we can make sure that our actions take place. And these are pictures from the last report that we generated in one of the areas in Honduras. This is one of the projects that we are currently working on, and we are working with 3 member organizations. They have focused on their efforts in assisted restoration. So we want to make sure that we promote conservation involving the youth and children in all of the steps of the conservation process, and also promoting through bird clubs the importance that these organizations have. They help voluntarily, and that has been difficult in lately, but we continue to keep in touch with the community. And the important part is that even though the project doesn't have financial resources to continue, the organizations do have resources, because these are efforts directed locally. And the points that we mentioned before, which was about governance, the social tasks taken carried out by the community gives them a sense of belonging, and that way they own the protected areas and they are able to management in a better way. Because a lot of times we implement projects without asking directly to the community what it is they need. We discover that they are always going to have, or that they're always going to be aware of their needs. So we always try to ask the question, what do you need? And usually they say, we need a better water supply system, or we need you to support us with infrastructure for a school or books. And as organization, we ask those questions, and we ask, what are you going to give back to the environment? And the community says, we're going to work voluntarily by working on a specific part of the protected areas. We're going to protect the area by patrolling the borders, and that way helps us keeping the conservation processes in place within the pilot areas. And also it is important to acknowledge the roles. Without inequality, this is a social participation model that is inclusive, because sometimes we forget about that point. And particularly we try to assure the participation from the people in the communities. And in order to do so, we focus on youth and women education so they can become leaders with enough sensibility and to be firm enough to be able to become decision makers. And we also need to empower the role of women, especially, not that we forget about the others, especially because we want them to participate in governance. So we start connecting the civil organization to the community, and that way we've been able to make sure that we can overcome the obstacles. For example, in Honduras, less than 1/4 of the people in charge of conservation activities are women. So as a reflection, we are thinking about a network of partners at a community level that, considering the communities, the organizations that work as the middleman, and that way we can eventually generate programs of simultaneous scopes to keep a public institution, either private or mixed, either public, private, or mixed, that can create regional opportunities. And that way we can also keep synergies alive with the state communities and the general society, which is going to allow us to visualize the joint efforts. And we also want to thank our network of partners, because thanks to each of them, we've been able to carry out the activities that we have. And MOCAP collaborates directly with organizations in Canada, in the US. At some point, we also were cooperating with the German corporation. And that way, we've been able to develop everything that we're doing. And this is all thanks to our organizations, our partner organizations. So thank you so much for giving us the time to explain to you what we do. Great, thank you, Candy. This is impressive work that you're carrying out. This is a network of networks, as we can see, and they're all for conservation. I don't know if anybody has a question, a comment for Candy, for MOCAP. How many members did you say that you have in the country? How many NGOs? Managers at a national level, 71. It's a voluntary membership, and so far we only have 25 members. Sarai has a question, so Sarai, go ahead.
Hola.
Hello.
Muchas felicidades por tu
Well, first of all,
trabajo.
congratulations for your work. It is amazing, and I do have a question. Which have been, for example, if you could name the 5 biggest challenges in the last couple of years to continue with that collaborations, what would you say the top 5 challenges are? Well, that's hard. That's hard to say. This is based on the work that is done by the organizations. I think that for many organizations, there is not enough funding or resources that are guaranteed in a permanent way. Unfortunately, our situation, as I think is the situation of many Latin American countries, the environment is not part of the political agenda. So in some organizations have had to raise their voice and sometimes argue with the government to be able to highlight the importance. Also, another challenge is the public policies. Some of them are supposed to be in favor of conservation, but we call them perverse mechanisms, because maybe today you're creating a protected area, but then tomorrow the same politicians are creating policies so that protected area has cocoa plantations or palm oil plantations. So also the struggle that a lot of environmental defenders have had to face by themselves. Some of them have had to keep a low profile. We have had martyrs talking about protecting the environment. So we have emblematic cases of people that loved the ecosystems or the biodiversity, but we had never had anyone in jail and until Berta Cáceres. And so her trial continues to move forward, and we hope that it finishes soon. And I think that a lot of the issues are related to the ownership of the land. And as long as there is not an acknowledgement of protected areas exclusively for conservation, it's a problem for us as defenders of the environment. And I'm not only talking about protected areas, but also private natural reserves. So every concept that you can think of are going to continue to be affected as long as our environmental policies are not coherent with what we want to achieve. Wow, very impressive. Thank you so much, Candy, and congratulations to MOCAP and greetings to all its members. Thank you. Well, here we have a couple of comments. It says, beautiful work, congratulations. And it says, Candy, really exciting work. Congratulations, Candy, excellent work. So now we're going to travel to Guatemala. We have another exciting presentation. Community Cloud Forest Conservation. We have Tara and Rob Cahill, and I also see a couple of Kichi girls back there. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly. So let's go to Guatemala. So you can tell us about your experience. Go ahead. Good afternoon, everyone. We are really thankful for the time that you're giving us to be able to talk about the program that we have here in Guatemala. My name is Elvira. I am one of the coordinators of the Environmental Education Project in our organization. And well, we're going to explain a little bit about what is the work that we carry out here in our rural areas. We are in places where people are not aware or don't know what conservation of the environment is. And so, sorry, I'm trying to share my screen and I'm having a small technical issue, so apologies. I don't know if I need a, do you want me to share my screen so I can show your presentation? No worries. Yes, we can do it. One moment. Meanwhile, greetings to everyone from Guatemala. So we can clearly see that we work in rural areas, and in these areas, we are talking about places that are very far away from the city and very close to the cloud forests. So one of the goals of the program of cloud forests is conservation, is to be able to preserve the habitat of the birds, of migratory birds, endemic birds, which are vulnerable or which are in risk of or that are endangered. So we not only focus on habitat preservation, but also we are training young people to be able to create their agroforest parcels so they can minimize the extreme poverty in which they live, because we realize that the more extreme poverty we have, then we have misnourishment, and that goes hand to hand with conservation, because if the person doesn't have enough to survive, then the environment tends to be more vulnerable to be destroyed. So one of our goals is to educate young people, and so they can get to know their surroundings and how important everything within the ecosystem is, every tree, and to highlight the importance of the ecosystem and the impact that this ecosystem can have in their life quality. So these ladies are going to eventually become mothers. So we are educating them from now so future generations can have the same idea of preserving the habitat of the birds, especially the chipes, which is their habitat as well, is this migratory bird that arrives to this place in Guatemala. So we work in different areas of Guatemala, and we train those young ladies that are very far away from urban areas. Hi, I'm Delia Valdizon. I am engineer in environmental management, and I am the coordinator of environmental projects. We are seeing here on the screen that the dark green area is a cloud forest, and the light green is a tropical forest here in Guatemala. And usually we focus on the northern area of the country of Guatemala. Next, please. And next, please. There, the pink areas highlight the area that is important for the birds, which is within the tropical forest and also within the cloud forests. So these are clear examples of the areas where we are focusing on. We realize that in rural areas, houses are kind of far from each other, but what we are focusing on is that every time we visit the villages or the communities, we realize that the house that we can see on the slide has one family. But as small as the community is, they have a very big area focused on monoculture. So they are cutting a lot of trees to keep one single crop. But after educating them, we want to educate them to create agroforest areas. That way, in their parcel, they can obtain the benefits of having a forest and also all of the food that they need. And even they can have another economic incomes to and avoid at the same time the cutting the trees of the forest. So one of the main focuses that we have with this program to educate young women is to raise awareness for conservation, because at the end of the day, that is going to be part of conservation of the birds' habitat. So they are helping themselves, because we also know that birds are very important for producing and also for harvesting. So young ladies get all the knowledge that they need from our programs, and that way they also replicate the knowledge that they learn with their neighbors and with all the people in the communities, and that's how we think we can achieve conservation in different communities like these ones. Here is where our organization has had impact. The red lines In the red lines, we can observe that this is the areas where we have, which are important for birds that are within the cloud forests, and which the cloud forest is in the northern area of the country. The orange polygons are the communities where we are educating young ladies as part of the program. So we can see the impact that this program has had by bringing young ladies from the different communities that inhabit the area of the cloud forest in the northern area of Guatemala. And that way we are able to strengthen the impact that we want to have in this area, which is conservation of the cloud forest, by implementing agricultural agroforests parcels. So we have the location or the exact point where the young ladies live. For example, in this photo, this lady lives in the municipality of San Pedro Carricha, and the line can show us that she lives in a community that is within the forest. And most of the women that participate in the project live in areas like this. So we also encourage them to start doing bird watching, and also we teach them how to combine agriculture with forest conservation, because we cannot avoid the production of food because it's for their daily consumption. And these are areas that we haven't reached yet, but we want to, which is the Sacanich mountain chain, which is the top part of the map, then Purula, and then Sierra de las Minas or Minas mountain chain. So we want to reach those areas because these are very big forest areas, and it is important to protect them so we can slow down the livestock and monocultures practices. And this is an example of an agroforestry plot. These are women who are part of the program, so they are learning how to work with an agroforestry system, and they learn how to maintain them as well. And why are we using an agroforestry plot? We start from the ground, then we have the Soto forest, the bushes, trees that keep 25% of the shadows, and then tall trees. The goal is that when you have an agroforestry plot, we have biodiversity. We get different type of animals, especially birds, and they feed themselves from the different components that we have as part of the plot. So that way we contribute to balance in nature and always keeping agriculture along with forest conservation. Next, please. Here we have one of our students. Her name is Rosalia Sichol. She lives in the upstream of our basin, the Mesa River, and she lives in the upstream part of it.
Rosalia was with us in the second grade of school in the programs for children and birds. And the second, third, fourth, and fifth, and sixth grade, she took the training course for birds with us. And so she went from our bot program, and now she's been studying in the university, no, in Mariano Galvez University. The Rosalia in this picture, she's with her her grandmother's. I took the picture of the black burnium that you can see that in that picture. That's on a palm tree, and the tree were the same species as it's a palm. I didn't actually. It's in the same area. So in the case of Rosalia, we can see the she's in grammar school where just barely were getting to 6th grade, but through the support of our program, they were always studying on birds and now she's covering her first year at university, and the curricula that we brought on 2013, we only went from to schools like with our professors like Elvira. She went with us to this school. It was one of the first villages that got access to this curricula, and this is Cornell University curricula, and this is something we were trying to project, this U.S. Fish and Wildlife, a project that we brought with Fish and Wildlife, and this provided the support for the program of environmental education, focusing on birds. And another migration that I'd like to talk about is this Setophaga fusca, or black burnian warbler. It's only here for a couple of weeks. This is a bird that nests in Canada. It gets to Colombia, to Venezuela for the time of non-reproductive season. But Guatemala is a very important point for the migration route of this bird. And so they stop over site, and it gets they go to relieve their load, their baggage. And I really like to think that, think of this migration, the migration of birds. It's really fascinating to follow them. Also, we got here just a couple of slides where we can quickly look at the birds are using the fruit trees, and there's part of the environment and of a plot, agricultural plot. This is just to make you hungry, to make us hungry. Whenever we look at the different products that we can have from a plot of agricultural forest, we can address the critical malnutrition right here in this area, and this is the way that we can address some of the social issues and at the same time help the birds. This is the famous achiote, chayao, or achiote. That it's a red color for meals, for food in general. It's a natural color as color effect. Pacaya in the Kichi language, it combines very well on this kind of plot because it enjoys the shade and it grows, and it's way happier under the shade, and it provides a great deal of fruit. An interesting observation in our context here, there's a lack of proteins here, and we're looking at a very good source here, and this is the kind of it's almost like eating meat. Having this it's almost like a beef steak in terms of proteins. And naranjilla, vitamin A, lulo in some other countries. Also the famous malanga. This is a carbohydrate that can stand the shade. Vanilla, this is a future, this is the face of agriculture in this century, because we can have the agriculture and the forest at the same time living together. And this is a crop, this is a vanilla crop. It's only all forest around. There we go. We used an application. It's called Mis Coordenadas GPS, where this community learns how to use this in order to register every single plot being conducted in the north of the country. And likewise, we promote the nurseries, the family nurses or community nurseries, depending on the scope or the limitations of the girl in this program. And that's it. That's about it for us. No, there's more. No, there should be more. Give me just a second. Or maybe we're out of time. I just want to mention that we have registered through the coordinators of my GPS, and the efforts through, from our students. We have been able to register 250 hectares of an agro forest plots. Oh, there we go. Okay. So for this app, it's pretty simple to use. Also, they will learn about the accuracy that they need to have a GPS point, and also they get to visit the fountain of water that they have at their own communities. And so we link an forest plot with hydric reloading to have this kind of monitoring from this plots. And so we understand that if we are able to maintain a forest in a mountain, then obviously we're going to be able to maintain, to conserve, we have a good conservation of the water resource. And so we connect these two aspects that are particularly key elements, that we could not have any lives if we don't have air and to have crops to feed us. So we connect these two natural resources are so critical, so essential to everyone. And then we also train and teach these young ladies to preserve and to keep and to maintain all these resources. And likewise, we also have a platform which is called Airtable, where they get to automatically register their own information. They send that to us, and we get that through the platform with pictures, the specific, the GPS location, and to have a monitoring prior and after the establishing of this plot. Thanks. Next. So we have here some of the examples, the training courses and the environmental education programs, particularly focusing the birds. When these young ladies, our program, learn how to observe and to appreciate the birds. And we believe that from the appreciation, the sensibilization, they become aware from what they're able to see, and to appreciate that the birds are part of every living organism on Earth. And so they're learning how to use the binoculars and to watch all the different species, and using a guide through the different families that are existing in our location. Here we have the guide where these young ladies learn to identify through the images, and they start now becoming more involved, drawing, coloring, and learning at the same time. We have their own scientific names, los chipes or warblers, and they start using these guidelines. Next. We have here these young girls to they're having a good time here, but at the same time they're learning about the warblers. Also, if we can identify, we not only work with young girls, but we also work with different educational centers. They come to our center, our facilities, to learn about the conservation and also identification of birds and migration species. And the number of students that we have received throughout from 2012 all the way to 2020. I'm gonna just say that to 2013, that was 2 years in which we started the project with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And so we selected 12 schools as a pilot. And those were the 12 schools that were selected to begin the program, the pilot. And then the next year we expanded to 19. And in 2014, we had other schools to get to 15 and then 18. And then we had a great level of growth, and we went up to in 2016, 17, and 18. And 2019 is where we had a lot of secondary schools, high school kids, and to bring, instead of having more primary, but more secondary level. And also we have a very good start of, but in March, nothing. So that's why we only have 30 right now. So here the young girls are starting to their own art with the guidelines. They start developing other arts and then continue to learn and to have an additional income to be able to make a living, to contribute, and to continue to live in their villages, getting a profit, making a profit. Yes, it's all embroidered of the wordlet. It's the same one in the guidelines. It's the one that she's embroidering. Also, you can see here that they're learning how to get familiarized with the observation tools for migratory species. I'm right there in 2014. I'm part of the picture when we first began on the observation practices and learning a little more about the lives of the birds and how they have an influence in our lives as human beings. So we have here the group of teachers, all trained to be able to give talks about birds to young girls, to other young girls, and this is in Tikal. That's it, I think. That's the last one. That will be the last. Yes. So maybe you have questions now. That's all of our presentations and the plots that we've been working with the young ladies, young girls. Excellent. Thank you so much, Elvira. What's the name of your Delia? Thank you so much, Delia. Cahill as well. In the chat, we can see what a great program. How many students have you had every year? Well, we had a graphic with the numbers of out of the walk program, our program for young girls on 120, 130 each sessions and 2 sessions per year. So we're talking about around 240 people per year that we have had from the beginning of the program. More than 1,200 students, 160 different communities in 5 different departments in Chapel, and almost 90% of them it's Alvarado, but we also have had the counterpart with nature defenders. They took students from Petén, and we had students from Baja Verapaz and Cliché, and a few of Sabal. Gabi Fuentes saying great efforts, wonderful work. Stephanie Shepard, awesome work. It's very inspiring. Thank you for sharing. And from Forest Service, I had the opportunity to visit you a couple of years ago. It's wonderful to see the development of birds and the community development. We're good. We thank you for your email, Greg. We're doing fine. Thank you. Thank you for asking. And also, I want to I want to mention that Greg that created this this connection. I also had an opportunity to travel with Defensores de la Naturaleza group, and I went for the first time to this place, and all the young ladies, and it's just amazing to experience this place where they really looking for self-sustainable ways. They have they're become so efficient in the handling, the management of different energies. It's truly an inspiration, and this is what Partners in Flights promotes: all these different networks and connections, and to connect players and initiatives. And so we continue to thrive. We continue to conduct new projects. So I agree with everybody. This is truly inspirational. Thank you so much for sharing. All right. Now we want to move on to the next presentation, which is the Boreal initiative from Canada with Samuel Hatching.
Hello, hello. So yeah, I'll just share my screen here. And please let me know if that works.
We see your screen, you're good.
Okay, cool. Just a sec here. Okay, so you guys can all hear me okay? Perfect. Sounds good. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, everyone. Thanks, Becky, for the invitation, and thanks everyone for sharing today. Like, so awesome pictures all around, really inspiring stories. And so yeah, today hopefully you'll enjoy a little trip up north, so in northern Canada. And I just want to make sure that I acknowledge before I start the fact that I'm in Yellowknife, the Northwest Territories, on the traditional territories of the Yellowknife Dene and the North Slave Métis. So I'll provide today an overview of what we refer to as the Western Boreal Initiative, but just for a bit more context, I realized that the title in the agenda was maybe not that appealing, but we'll be talking about birds and climate change. So there we go. We've seen a lot of these slides a few times already, so I won't spend too much time. John, Alexander, and others have been bringing that up, but just kind of want to reiterate the fact that we hear loud and clear here in Canada the need for multi-species conservation planning. So there's all kind of initiative underway. Definitely birds are declining. We're losing a lot of boreal birds, and we want to make sure that we try to get some kind of level ecosystem-based approach to conservation. And a few years ago, there's that specific initiative here, the Pan-Canadian approach, that was brought up within our agency and has been shared with partners, territorial provincial governments. But there's definitely been a lot of interesting principles that really guides the work that we've been doing over the last few years, and I'll be talking to you about. So again, landbird biologist. My role is to monitor and monitor status and trends of landbirds in my neck of the wood, in my region. But there's some notion about shared priority, shared leadership, string partnership, aligning investments. So just stop working in silo and try to really work more together with all kind of partners that are having similar interests, but for, let's say, other ecological processes that are definitely influencing our birds. So it's within that kind of mindset that we started putting together what we referred to as the Western Boreal Initiative. So the intent or the objective was to build a generic toolkit that would allow forest species and land management, or help inform these
I'm sorry,
processes.
there's an audio.
Oh, sorry. Are we good to go now?
Yes, we're good to go. Thanks.
Oh, yeah, no worries. So basically it was try to work together to set up a toolkit where people can actually all get together in order to achieve a common goal. And we use the Western Boreal Forest as a bit of a, let's say, sandbox proof of concept. And the methods is relying on ecological forecasting science and using some integrated spatial simulation and data. So working with a bunch of subject matter experts within a platform that we refer to as SPADES, which is a bit in a simplistic way, a system of R packages. So it's a language that most biologists doing statistical modeling are kind of using these days. But in terms of results, today I will be providing an overview of three papers we have underway as it relates to landbirds and climate change in the Northwest Territories. And I'll provide an overview of the relative importance of climate, fire, and vegetation based on our modeling framework, potential winners and losers. So in a Northern Boreal region that is considered relatively pristine in terms of human disturbances, what does our forecasting initiative kind of suggests? And then we'll touch base quickly and looking at umbrella species concept and the idea of trying to leverage other current conservation initiative, in this case, the boreal caribou, which is a highly important species, both culturally, food security, and there's a lot of conservation action that are on the way for the species. So I'll touch base on that briefly. I first wanted to mention that I'm giving a presentation here. It's providing an overview of something that is way bigger than just myself. By no stretch of imagination, I've been able to do a small fraction of that work. I want to acknowledge the fact that we refer often to subject matter experts, and you'll see why in a few slides, but we're working with a bunch of different people, programmers that are developing the models, and there's all kind of general feedback that we're receiving anywhere from management to land managers to also indigenous partners and so on and so forth, to make sure that to the best of our capacity, we make our work useful. So there's a wide range of partners across the board, and I don't really want you guys to look at them all, but it's just to kind of provide that big disclaimer. So in terms of schematic, in terms of what we do, our workflow, some kind of a little visual here. So we talk about data processing. So we have a bunch of researchers, subject matter experts that works on all kind of different ecological processes of interest. And then they are the one working with the data, building the model, but the model is being built in a way that models fit within each other. So one model output can become a model input for another model, and so on and so forth. So it kind of a consistent workflow. And we start generating some landscape simulations. So the idea of how forest regenerates, the forest dynamic, how wildfire come and change, but also a bunch of feedback loops as it relates to insects outbreak, for example, and other anthropogenic disturbances. Then we create these changing landscapes, and then we have all kind of wildlife indicators. So we have land birds, we have caribou, we have even carbon sequestration as an ecological process of interest, and we have other bird groups such as waterfowl. So and we use these outputs for all kind of spatial optimizations, analysis, and looking at how things might change in the future for our species. So this is a big picture component of the Western Boreal Initiative, and now I'll just own in on some specific output that we came up with. But maybe just before, again, just want to reiterate the SPADES modeling platform that we're working on. Don't want to go in too much detail. Here are a few components in terms of, I would say, philosophically, what is the purpose of this modeling ecological forecasting framework we're using, and there's a paper here that presents that framework that was just published earlier this year. So here is just for some context: Western Canada, the Northwest Territories is north of the 60th parallel, so basically at the tree line. So the first study we had was trying to look at having a sense of, when we're talking about the effect of climate change, are we talking about climate change per se? Are we talking about the effect of climate on fire? Are we talking about climate on vegetation? And looking at the direct and indirect effect of these different stressors. So we work with the Boreal Avian Modeling Project. So we've been working on building species distribution model derived from boosted regression trees. We converted count data and density estimates using Peter Solomos' statistical approach. We did that for quite a few bird species, and we ran some simulation or forecasting to be able to compare 2011 condition to 2100. And we use one climate scenario in this instance and one RCP. So in terms of, don't want to go into too much detail, but the thing is, it was a factorial experiment. We had a combination of different types of model where there was vegetation, fire, and bird densities. And there was different component of what we call climate sensitivity. There was some model assuming no climate effect, some with just one climate effect, some with two climate effect, and those models that were fully climate sensitive. So it's just a way to try to partition or tease apart the effect of climate. And what we found is quite interesting and to some extent surprising. And I don't want to go in too much detail as to why that's all in the paper, but here in blue, this is what we expect in terms of the positive species that are responding positively and species that are expected to respond negatively to climate. So the direct effect of climate in blue. In red, it's the fire. The effect of fire tend to go in all kind of directions. And in green would be the effect of vegetation. So positive, negative effect of vegetation or of climate change through vegetation. So indirect effect of fire and vegetation. So the interesting part here is that if you look at the x-axis, they are quite different. So if we stack these effects one over the other, we can see that it's mainly blue. So based on the modeling that we've been up to, there seems to be a direct effect of climate change that seems to be disproportionate compared to the effect of vegetation and fire indirectly. And there's all kind of reason in terms of the lag of the vegetation response to climate change and stuff that we came up with, but I'll keep it at that for now. Another interesting finding from that study is that we started generating some maps and start looking in different between 2011 and 2100 what the bird community might start looking like. And we could see some really interesting heterogeneity or difference spatially about where species are expected to decrease. Like here, more, or the number of species would decrease more at the tree line, but there's a massive river, and along that river, we're expecting actually things to probably even go better. So probably even more species, new species coming in, and maybe not as much loss. So it was kind of a first step that leads us to the second paper, which was to try to look into that in more detail. So we wanted to look at population size, spatial distribution for 70 or so species. And now we kind of look at not just 2011 to the end of the century, we looked at short-term, long-term kind of potential change. And we also looked at more climate scenarios because there's definitely some variation there depending on what you think the climate, how you think the climate might change. So we came up and set up a kind of a list of, or initial assessment of looking at who might be the winners and who might be the losers. And what it came up with that was quite interesting is that over 2011 to 2031, so basically what we're actually in theory experiencing right now, we would have a few winners out of 72 species, not that many, and a few losers, about 5 species out of 72. But the interesting thing is that there's some consistency among models, but also there's some species that are starting to pop as benefiting from climate change. Some species that are quite interesting because there's otherwise big conservation concerns, such as black-pole warbler. And if we take the same pattern and we move that to 2091, then the number starts to, not too surprisingly, they start to change a little bit. So we have quite a bit more winners, and we start to get more losers as well, but still not a ton of losers and proportionally more winners. Again, we need to put climate change in its spatial context, and we would expect that the ecosystem, maybe north of 60, would diversify a little bit with climate change. And this is just an example of when there's too many species to add. I just put a number here, but there's some interesting consistency, but also interesting is in the long run, then the black-pole warbler becomes a loser. So that's something to keep in mind. And there's some other species that are definitely of conservation concern up here, although they're not listed, like the American tree sparrow and great-cheeked thrush. So that's definitely something that caught our attention for sure. And rusty blackbird, obviously, that's a species of conservation concern. Now, oh, sorry about the animation here. So what we start doing is we start mapping these distributions. So for example, we can see for a lot of species that, in fact, we see the encroachment, some species coming in the territories, and brown-headed cowbird is definitely a species of concern for us. We don't really have them a lot now, and they're expected to be there way more common. And the opposite is true with the white crown sparrow at the northern end of the study area, where we're expecting them to decrease quite substantially. So just to show a little bit of the contrast of the winner and losers kind of spatially. Now, again, looking at climate change, looking at the species response, but the reality in terms of conservation in our area, where there's a lot of areas that are considered, again, relatively pristine, but we still have conservation concern, but it's also really expensive to access and protect and manage any kind of area. There's definitely a lot going on with boreal caribou these days, species at risk, high priority species, and I mentioned that earlier. So we wanted to start evaluating, given that there will be some conservation investment in boreal caribou, what might be the conservation return for landbirds. So how much of the landbird community will be up for the ride, I guess. So we created a boreal caribou umbrella index, and we've run that index across different area of conservation. So if we have 5% of a bird population, 10%, 15% across all species, we did way more time periods, 3 RCPs and a few replicates. So the idea, again, the framework is exactly the same one that we've been using the 2 previous studies, but we added a boreal caribou component, and that's the whole integration of models that we're talking about since the beginning of the presentation. And this is a second round of review, and hopefully it's going to be accepted for publication relatively soon. So what it comes up to here is just basically saying that you see that dotted line, there's just a grocery list of species. I don't want you to really pick any species in particular, but there's definitely a pattern where the median value tend to be on the left side of that line, suggesting that basically the boreal caribou index for a given species will be protecting actually disproportionately less than random. So the boreal caribou would be quite a poor umbrella species, but there's still some species that will be there for the ride, but there's definitely not a lot. So that was, some people can say that's not surprising, some people say surprising, but it's a bit of a novel approach to be able to quantify that. Then we can look at it in a different way, not species specific. We can look at different groups, and same kind of pattern obviously emerge. there's that shrub associated species that will likely gonna be there, and get some conservation bang from boreal caribou conservation, but all the other groups, it seems quite unlikely. So this slide is just to show that there's a lot of data that came out of these simulation, looking at how that pattern actually changes through time and as a function of different conservation conservation targets. The different colors here are just different climate scenarios. So for example, this is 2 species, American robin and lesser yellowleg. We have 1 conservation target, and we have on the x-axis here, that would be the different years. So for a given scenario, there's 1 relationship as it relates to the caribou index relative to, again, the 0 value that below that is performing worse than random. So it's just the idea that there's a lot more to it, to the story, and we're starting to kind of delve into that a little bit more. And also looking at other umbrella species, so to try to add more species and to see at what point we can definitely get some good conservation value, because definitely multi-species conservation will go through priority species conservation. So in terms of conclusion here, I just want to kind of highlight the fact that there was a lot of wishful thinking about how a bunch of researchers will be able to kind of work together and be able to work towards a common goal and not working as much in silo. So we've been able to demonstrate that, and we're trying to work right now to write that up, but also communicate our data product with our different partners and see if there's an interest and how that can be useful to help protected area planning evaluation, for example. And also how much of a buy-in we have from senior management from different government agencies about how that product is useful. And we definitely think that that integration that is transdisciplinary is the way to go, because taking just the most, to our knowledge, what's the best forest dynamic model as a bird biologist, it can be dangerous in terms of the conclusion we can derive. But and right now we've been providing some preliminary assessment of the effect of climate change on land birds, the winners, losers, the whole umbrella species, and finding a way to actually quantify that. And we also understand that we need to put our result in context and look at other studies like Audubon and others that are starting to look at climate change and see if there's any kind of consistency and discrepancy, trying to explain why. So this is what I had for you guys today, and apologies for some maybe dry figures. I just want to acknowledge that those are co-authors on the 3 papers that we've been working on, and we're actually also in the development of a Shiny apps or a web app, so that we can make all of our raster data products available to users for download. So thank you very much, and I would be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Samuel. Super interesting of the methodology and the science behind this. I want to ask you, I don't know these ecosystems at all. They're quite enigmatic for me, but I would like to ask you, the outcomes are being used or in reference to decision-making processes. And can you give us an example of that? And another question, I'm curious, are there any populations, local populations or indigenous living in there, in that territory? And are they involved in this kind of decision-making progress?
I'm really happy that you brought up that question, because I felt almost bad to just talk about the science and not all the cool stuff that's actually happening about collecting the data as well. So, because I also have a boatload of really nice pictures of here, actually. It's quite nice, a landscape. And yes, we work a lot with indigenous territory. It's actually, we don't do any field work anywhere unless we have written support from the indigenous communities within their traditional territories to do the work. And most of the work we're trying to do nowadays is mostly using autonomous recording units like these ARUs. So basically, we're trying to promote as much as we can community-based monitoring. But also there's big initiative, like John mentioned on behalf of Windy this morning, the 25 by 25 and 30 by 30 in terms of protected area. So 30% protected area by 2030. And a lot of that goes through indigenous protected areas. And there's a lot of ongoing initiative in the north. So this kind of modeling exercise is actually being used to evaluate the conservation value based on our indicators for existing protected area, but it's also being used to actually inform protected area planning. So for example, there's these kind of hotspots here. We have a bunch of protected areas that are at different level, and we're doing these kind of assessments, but I didn't have time to go in too much detail. But yeah, thanks a lot for the question. And that's, we're definitely actively working with different partners to inform management plans, for example.
Thank you so much, Samuel. Sari in the chat is saying, congratulations, Samuel, excellent work. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you very much.
Now let's move on to the last one.
We have a question over here, sorry.
Yeah, I was wondering, in one of the analyses, you showed that climate was a much stronger driver than vegetation and fire in predicting the winners and losers. And I was wondering how you took that piece of information towards the management outcomes, because of those three, you know, climate is the one most out of our control.
Yes, that's actually a really good point. And the idea right now in terms of actual conservation action, there's in fact very limited we can do, at least regionally, but at least it can be accounted for. So it's mostly accounting for in conservation planning at the moment. But, you know, also a big disclaimer that I clearly put on any kind of presentation, it's that it's assuming that anything that influences population right now is on the breeding ground, right? So we've talked a lot all day about full life cycle, wintering ground and stuff. So we're really hoping that the framework will build on that to add some full life cycle components down the road. But to my knowledge, we're not quite there yet. But thanks for the question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions here? No more questions here, Claudia.
Thank you, Edwin. Let's go for the last presentation of the day. This is the restoration of the collaborative for the forest landscape in Northern Blues. And for that, we have Jim and Rattler. And they're here to tell us about this initiative. Go ahead, please, guys.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jamie Ratliff. I'm a forest wildlife biologist with the Forest Service based out of Baker City, Oregon. I'm just going to give you a little bit of background to set the stage for Jamie Stevens to share some of the exciting work we've been doing on our Northern Blues CFLRP. And we're going to use that acronym a lot, so I wanted to define it. The Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Project is a program that was established by Congress in the Public Land Management Act of 2009. And then it was reauthorized again in the 2018 Farm Bill, and additional funding was allocated in the 2021 bipartisan infrastructure law. So the purpose of the CFLRP is to encourage collaborative science-based ecosystem restoration of priority forest landscapes, and to demonstrate the degree to which various ecological restoration techniques achieve ecological and watershed health objectives. And so to demonstrate the effectiveness of various restoration techniques, up to 10% of the money allocated can be spent on monitoring, which makes it a unique funding stream for the federal government, and that we don't usually allocate money specifically to monitoring. And we're talking about a lot of money because up to $80 million annually was authorized for 2019 to 2023 in last year's budget infrastructure law. So, and these are massive landscapes. The one that Jamie will be talking about today is the Northern Blues CFLRP. And we are a 4 million acre CFLRP. And out of that 4 million acres, almost everything except wilderness areas has some kind of treatment proposed on it within the next 10 years. And so when I say treatment, I'm referring to silviculture and prescribed fire. Those are the primary restoration techniques that we use. And this forest restoration is going to occur whether the bird community is at the table or not. So it behooves us to figure out how to coordinate with the people that are implementing these treatments, because we are the ones that know about the bird habitat needs. And so we need to be helping inform these silviculture and fuels treatments so that we can maximize the benefits to birds and minimize negative consequences at this landscape scale. So in order to inform project design, it's imperative that we monitor the effects of the treatments on the birds so that we can determine whether we're having the intended effects. And so we're really excited to partner with KBO on this monitoring effort to have experts on public land management monitoring taking the lead for the monitoring of our Northern Blues CFLRP. So Jamie, take it away.
My presentation's in the shared drive.
This one?
Ah, that's it. Thank you. I'd first just like to thank Claudia and the others who put this session together. I am so impressed with the breadth of presentations in the partners engaged in bird conservation. And yeah, it's just kind of fun to see all these very different concepts, and you guys are all presenting on such impressive work. So thank you, Jamie, for the introduction as well. I'm going to be talking with you about aligning bird conservation priorities within the Northern Blues. I like to call it CFLRP. It's a little more fun than CFLRP, so it's just bear with me with that. Got a ton of co-authors on this presentation. It's definitely the work of the entire KBO team as well as the partnership. I think we do have a lot of new partners with us virtually, so I want to take just a second and introduce my organization. I'm with Klamath Bird Observatory, and we advance bird and habitat conservation through science, education, and partnerships. Our science is rooted in long-term monitoring, keep a pulse on how our bird populations are doing generally, and then applied ecology like I'm going to be talking about here, see how birds are responding to different natural and anthropogenic changes on the landscape, and theoretical research to better understand bird distributions and full life cycle science. We think that all three of these things are really necessary in order to do the type of conservation planning that I'm going to be talking about. Our science is rooted here in the Klamath-Siskiyou bioregion of Southern Oregon, where a lot of our partners have joined us this week. We apply our results across the Pacific Northwest through our data center, Avian Knowledge Northwest, which is a node of the Avian Knowledge Network. And then we work internationally across the ranges of our shared birds. Okay, so this is a roadmap concept that we've been floating around for about 9 months. And the approach I'm talking about today isn't new, but the opportunity to apply it has increased rapidly here in the United States. In the last several years, there's been a lot more funding that's become available to do forest restoration, fuel reduction, forest resilience work, especially on our federal lands. And so it's become even more perhaps pressing to make sure that this model of making sure birds are at the table is one that can be more easily understood. And so welcome your thoughts at the end, if this is making it more easier to understand or less. But we start with our groundwork here, birds as indicators. This is the Partners in Flight approach, one that many of you have been hearing us talk about for decades. Especially here in Oregon, Washington, and California, our state chapters of Partners in Flight have created really thorough and relevant conservation plans that apply the focal species approach. So, and we're also lucky that we've continued to get support, and all of our conservation plans for Oregon, Washington have been updated recently, the last one being finished just about a month ago. This is just kind of a snapshot of that focal species approach. What I'm going to be talking about for the northern blues is the Mesa mixed conifer forest. So we have 4 habitat attributes. Those are like forest characteristics, large snags, high canopy cover, dense understory, forest edges and openings, really broad general forest characteristics, but each of those has a focal species associated with it that is intended to be a relatively common bird. We've done some research demonstrating or verifying that this focal species approach does represent ecological characteristics and vegetation characteristics. But importantly, the focal species approach does not do a good job of representing our at-risk bird species. I'm going to get back to that idea in a minute. After we have this groundwork of birds as indicators, it's important to put our climate science at the front of it. We just heard that in the last talk. We shouldn't be thinking about anything without considering the climate effects. And so I'm not going to get into this science. I presented some of this at the last Western Working Group meeting. But the way I like to talk to our partners about this is that we now have really relevant climate science that is specific to our at-risk birds. Arvind was talking this morning. This is being incorporated into the Avian Conservation Assessment database, and soon will be incorporated into that database that we all use. This is the same science from Audubon that Arvind was talking about. And so I like to tell our partners this is just one more piece of the climate science and one that they can think about in their planning. And then here I want to circle back to that idea that we also need to be thinking about our at-risk birds. And so in order to do that, we had the opportunity to partner with 2 of the joint ventures, Pacific Birds and Intermountain West, last April to come up with kind of some new visualizations of existing data layers. So really importantly, this isn't any new information, but it's a way that we're presenting it by bird conservation region in some hopefully digestible maps that the managers and decision makers can consider. So we have these new maps available for 4 of the bird conservation regions that show select bird species richness, essentially how many of our at-risk species are present in these Cook watersheds across a bird conservation region. So this is useful if, for example, across a seafloor, land managers are thinking about where to prioritize. The Northern Blues actually has an amazing prioritization framework already in place that Jamie and I are thinking about how to incorporate our avian science into. This is an example of a handout that we have that summarizes the at-risk species. This is for the Northern Rockies BCR, which is the geography of the Northern Blue seafloor. And so now the land managers there, as they're thinking about their forest planning, also have this list of at-risk species that they should be considering. Again, this is pulled directly from the ACAD, and it's just a way of packaging up those regional priority birds, and they're split into several urgency categories. So we had the opportunity, our first opportunity to get out on the ground in the Northern Blues was this spring of 2022. So we just had the earliest nugget started for our monitoring project there. And this year's monitoring was specific to cool, moist habitat. So there's a number of different habitat gradients across the Northern Blue seafloor, as there was in that Partners in Flight conservation plan. And so one thing we want to do is make sure that we're applying the correct list to the correct habitat type. Because our focal species very quickly can mean the wrong attribute if you take them out of that overall vegetation type. So these are the birds that were present within the cool moist surveys on the northern blues this spring. And they're organized by species in brown in this list are common pre-restoration. And this is notable because of our at-risk birds, 8 of them are already really common. So that's kind of what Jamie was saying, where we want to make sure that our forest actions across large landscapes aren't causing any detriment to these species on their breeding grounds. And then we have species in orange and in mustard that were also relatively abundant on the landscape. And this is where we see a potential opportunity. So when we're thinking of, I'm going to hold that thought. I'm going to get to that thought in a second. So, okay, so now we have our birds as focal species, our at-risk species, our climate science. That's when we have the opportunity to integrate it into conservation planning. Here in the United States, all forest work that happens on federal lands needs to go through a regulatory process referred to as NEPA. No idea what that acronym stands for.
National Environmental Protection Act.
Thank you, John. So within that, we can work with our partners to think about bird habitat relationships. And it's where we have the opportunity to make sure that what we think might be good actions for our at-risk species or our focal species fit within the umbrella of the environmental assessment that the land managers are doing across the landscape project area. And usually I read the overarching ideas of the NEPA projects that I've been working on, which are restoration based. And it's like, well, of course, we can do so many good things under an umbrella where our priorities are to prepare the landscape for beneficial fire, mitigate fire hazards for high value resources, and do ecological restoration to promote old and large forests, increase heterogeneity and increase ecosystem function. All of these align with the same priorities we would put forth if this was just for birds. Where we really have an opportunity to make a difference is when we go, after we have the NEPA, which is very overarching, then for each unit, delineated small area where a restoration action is going to happen, it gets its own prescription. And so that's where you really start to understand like how they're going to change the forest, what restoration actions are going to be taken, and to what extent. So like reductions in canopy cover, removal of understory. And so what we want to do here is increase the quality and complexity of those prescriptions to the benefit of our at-risk birds and to the benefit of our focal species as well. I like to tell the partners, we're not trying to change things. We're just looking to fine tune it a little bit. I've been incredibly impressed with the Northern Blues Forest Collaborative. This collaborative has been around. How long has this collaborative been around, Jamie?
I don't know, at least 5 years.
Yeah, they seem to have an incredibly sound foundation. I just got engaged with them last April, but they have a lot of great governance and foundational documents, and the meetings I've been to have been very impressive. One of the things I am really excited to see that they've already established is a document that all of the partners have signed called the Zones of Agreement. And this is where some of those trade-offs that in my other partnerships, they surface like every few months. We have the same conversation because every time we have the conversation, we might settle it for one restoration unit, but it doesn't become like a change in our thinking about the framework of what we're doing. So the fact that the Northern Blues already has these zones of agreements provides a foundation that we want to make sure as a new partner that we're fitting into. And so again, it wasn't hard. They have a zone of agreement around wildlife habitat trade-offs. Not every acre can do everything. We know this. When there's actions on the ground, we have winners and losers. But what we want to do is work with the partnership so that our at-risk birds become one of the trade-offs that's being considered.
Okay. How do we do that? So, I've been trying to do this for a long time with our focal species approach. And it's incredibly challenging because there's always winners and losers. And so what we just started, and I'm going to be presenting this to the partners at the Northern Blues in a couple weeks, is essentially using our habitat attributes from our focal species, these very basic habitat attributes that tend to get changed in a restoration project, putting our at-risk species in a matrix with those habitat attributes, and at a glance, and determining, this is a little heavy, but ignore the words. We've got green, it's going to benefit the species, yellow, it's going to be neutral, and red, it's going to harm the species. And so you can see that they all interact for all species. But now we have just a whole lot of information to begin to evaluate how a prescription would impact our at-risk species and make essentially a priori predictions, or change the prescription based on those a priori predictions and say, actually, if you just do this one other thing differently, maybe those orange and mustard colored kind of common, but not very common birds would benefit. And better understand the trade-offs. There's some tables like this in our focal species plan that have pluses and minuses in them. And so I'm imagining kind of simplifying that to something like that. Tom, who started at KBO last week, has been generating this for me the last couple of days. So thank you. Those are kind of the new ideas that I wanted to spend my time on today, because they are, I think, pushing our approach forward a bit. And that's what I've been spending my time on. The rest of the roadmap concept is really business as usual for a bird observatory. Business as usual for a bird observatory, not necessarily for land managers. Business as usual for KBO. After we have that figured out, we predict the response. Now we're going to do that for not only our focal species, but our at-risk species. Monitor, we already started some pre-restoration monitoring. We also have really exciting extensive inventory work going on. We're going to do the distribution modeling you guys have heard me talk a lot about. So we're monitoring at both the site and landscape scales. Incredibly excited about the Northern Blues commitment to monitoring. And then they'll implement the restoration. And Jamie told me this week that some of the sites we did pre-restoration monitoring for already this season have been treated. And so Tom and I will get to see those in a couple weeks. Eventually, after a year or two, we'll go back out, monitor post-restoration impacts, and then make sure that process, our goal is to get those results out quickly. These CFLRPs are 10-year projects, but this type of restoration work is going to continue in our area. So it's always a priority to have that collective learning, both within the partnership that we're working with, but also to apply it more broadly. Some acknowledgements in addition to that slew of co-authors that you saw at the beginning of the talk. Strong involvement from the joint ventures has framed the thinking around this. Another shout out to National Audubon. Their science is really, really impressive and helping us all do our work better. And to Partners in Flight, Western Working Group. That logo's not around anymore.
Perfect. Thank you so much to both Jamies. I see that there is a question. Becky, go ahead.
Yeah, so we're just starting to do that. It's primarily being gleaned from Birds of the World and Birds of Oregon, but you can use your own local sources. It would always need to be, you know, really geographically specific. We're hoping that we're gonna do this for all of the at-risk birds in the northern blues, and we have funding from the joint ventures to do something similar here on the Rogue Siskiyou National Forest, but that definitely is where there is still an investment. And if the proof of concept really comes to fruition, we could consider like building out a tool. Oh, man. I think I'm gonna take that back. We could, we'd have to figure out how to maybe make that more automated, but for now, it is a very labor intensive approach that would really only work if you had a hang on, conservation delivery specialist in the room. Yeah, Jen. Yeah, absolutely. And let's follow up and make those connections, either through the Western Working Group Forest Birds Committee or the Western Forest Initiative work, which is the work of these at-risk focal species, at-risk species. Oh, so close. Edwin?
A lot of this work has been done at the state level too, like we worked on developing species accounts like Nevada had done previously, and I think other states too. So some of those details are captured in those narratives, you know,
Yeah.
where we describe like key habitat characteristics. So it's still, you still have to kind of look, you know,
Yeah.
for that information, but I think in some regions that information has already been captured. So it'll be just a matter of kind of pulling it into a table like this.
Yeah, and I think that action, I know I said tool and I really regretted it because I actually don't think this work can be automated. Like, this cannot be done without a person. Like, the whole idea is to understand all of these pieces and know that those species accounts exist. And then it's only like maybe 40 hours of work,
Yeah.
which is nothing when you think about the fact that the Forest Service is putting, what, $10 to $40 million of work on the ground. Or so in the scale of the influence it could have, we need to invest in ourselves to help develop those types of things. I would really worry about misapplication if it was automated.
Yeah, Jane, this is great. I'm just curious about how the decision making happens on the treatments, if that's a Forest Service decision that the collaborative is advising on, or how that process works with the Northern Blues.
The decision ultimately rests with our line officers, who is either a district ranger or forest supervisor. In the case of the Northern Blues, the collaborative is asking for a more interactive role in determining the prioritization across the landscape. So oftentimes we end up going and prioritizing areas opportunistically. And so our collaborative would really like us to be more strategic, considering many more sources of data when deciding where we're gonna go first. So it could be high fire risk, for example, but it could also involve a number of other factors. And so out of this effort, we'll have some tools that allow birds to be one of those considerations.
Yeah, and I think that differs a little bit across collaboratives, and it definitely depends a little bit where the funding is coming from and who is like the ultimate decision maker. I think I work in some other collaboratives where we get to not only help draft the prescriptions, but review them and spend a lot of time going back and forth with them.
Are there other taxa groups in your collaborative? Like small mammals and?
So no, we are using the bird community to represent ecological health. And so our assumption is that if we are providing suitable habitat for all of these guilds of birds, we really don't need to look at the other species.
I'm gonna let that one go for now. I think it's a great idea, or at least the ecosystems on which they depend, if not the species themselves.
Yeah.
My question is, one of the game changers is unprecedented partnerships, right? And so if I think about the way we have done this for coming on 30 years now, especially with the agencies, it used to be an interdisciplinary team. And then we would often be asked to provide public comment. And we'd always want to say, no, we want to scope. And we couldn't often, unless we really had good relationships, get the opportunity to scope. And we soon realized that we didn't have the money and it was very ineffective if we were brought in the public comment period. So I want to ask you, Jamie R., my perception is, while every partnership is different and the decision-making frameworks are different, and I love that trade-offs thing that you all have, because I know Jamie re-has the conversations each time she goes into it in the other conversations. Jamie S. Is this fundamentally a different way of doing business, this collaborative process? And by nature, is it easier then to get us to the table, considering kind of this Partners in Flight always talks about the proactive approach. We try not to be regulatory in nature, but we do always throw around that if you do this now, they won't get listed later, which is a bit of a strong arm. Is this new collaborative approach that's being applied to huge landscapes versus the project by project approach we could never consistently get in our feet in the door on, a game changer for large scale bird conservation, especially from a priority bird perspective, leveraging the focal species approach?
That's a big question. I would say they are complementary. I think that I can't emphasize the importance of the public comment period because I have seen decision makers shape our project design based on public comments, even though people often feel like their comments aren't considered, they actually are. But at that point, it's not the landscape scale, that's a different scale, that's the project scale. Well, the game changer for birds, in addition to the public comment period, which is more of the activism piece, is tools like these species distribution models that you guys are producing that allow us to look at, okay, if we've got 4 million acres, we're going to treat over the next 10 years, what's that going to do to birds? It's a whole different scale of informing these decisions than commenting on specific prescriptions within a given project area.
Can I do a quick follow-up?
Sure.
Very quick. So then, if we're thinking, because, when we take the concept of conservation delivery specialists to NAPSI or to AFWA, they're asking for job descriptions. In that case, would part of the job description be engaging in the collaboratives, and the other part of the conservation delivery specialist job description be not only doing public comment, but maybe influencing public comment or no?
No.
No.
No, please say.
Moreover,
Think then that person, I mean, part of the beauty of a conservation delivery specialist is they can really build consensus between partners with disparate objectives, but also our internal decision makers. By building trust, because those conservation delivery specialists aren't Forest Service people. Like other examples where we have conservation delivery specialists are like the Nature Conservancy. And we're building trust from both sides of our public because they're perceived to be fairly neutral and they're providing science. And so that's where I think mixing those two things would be a horrible idea. But I did want to emphasize that I think the conservation delivery specialist concept is going to be integral to moving efforts like this forward, because very few people within the Forest Service will be willing or able to put in as much effort as I'm putting into working with you guys on this. So we need to make it something that is achievable for other forests to participate in.
that's great. I think we should revisit emphasizing the support that the delivery specialists will provide, not just to states, but to federal agencies too, because a lot of their partners are also in the same capacity situation where they cannot take on more projects or tasks, more comprehensively. And I think we have not been maybe messaging that part of the benefit as well as just state and other partners. Glad to always see. So we're gonna wrap up this session. And Claudia is gonna open the floor and kind of wrap up our session and invite, if there's a discussion or questions or comments from participants online or in person. So I'll give Claudia back the floor, and we have about 15 minutes, and then I'll come back to kind of wrap things up. Claudia.
Thank you. Well, I just want to thank everyone for their presentations. I am truly amazed by getting to know the different contexts in different countries and how we approach conservation. I think that we all share the passion and the commitment. To me, it's clear that there are differences between North and South, and it depends on the different problems that we face and the different contexts that each of us live. The presentation from the South are focused on the social part and in solving the day-to-day needs, talking about water, wood, stop deforestation, or because agricultural activities are speeding logging even more. So those are the demands. And so that's why we have a community development approach. And I think that is fascinating because they are having great learning experiences. And if we consider cultural topics, then that it makes it even richer, but then more passionate. And in the North, it is evident to me the technological improvements and the improvements in the use of science and the creation of tools. And I was saying before that we're all working in restoration somehow, and that birds can be indicators of the actions that we are implementing, so we ourselves can measure how we are moving forward and what impacts we're actually having in forest restorations. And what we heard from both Jamies is fascinating. I think it is incredible. I think that is setting a very high standard. I don't think we are at that level yet, or at that approach in Mexico and Central America, but this exchange is very enriching because that way we all can continue moving forward with our own agendas, but considering everybody's learning experience. And I just wanted to mention what we've been discussing for years here in Partners in Flight, that we want to consider the different approaches that are going to make our conservation efforts more efficient. And we were thinking about including the social science or the human component. We also talked about co-production, which is related to creating networks, alliances, relationships. And I think this is something that was mentioned by every speaker. We cannot work on our own. It's been proven, whatever approach and whatever priority we have, we need to work with other people, and communication definitely is a key element to learn from each other, and that is something that we want to promote in this space through the protocols, publishings, making reports, etc. So I want to celebrate that this agenda for this event was so enriching. It is a great motivation, and let's continue working together for that. And the floor is open to anyone who wants to make a comment, an additional mention if you found anything interesting in today's sessions, if you have a question or suggestion to continue working or enriching these spaces. So the floor is open to anyone who wants to participate.
Thank you, Claudia, for those words. As we wait to see if anybody has comments or follow-ups, I would like to invite all the partners that have been online and in person that may not be tied into the Partners in Flight network. One way to do that is to sign up for our list, emailing list that we have, and that's on the Partners in Flight website. So basically, anybody that participates and engages in conversations and Partners in Flight meetings is already a member. You don't have to do anything extra special, but one way we do communicate about our meetings and how we, as we develop agendas, and those are shared online through our email list. So I encourage those that are not receiving them to please sign up. And I think Jamie had a comment or a question.
I did have a comment. I just wanted to say that I think one of the things that I found so inspiring in the session this afternoon is the importance of all these different approaches and how important it is to think about all these different areas and audiences where we can be, you know, promoting bird conservation in our communities and those grassroots approaches that some of the presenters showed. And then sometimes there's, you know, big, more political or top-down opportunities. And it's just so great to remember that we need to be doing all of those things to achieve our collective goals.
I think that's really great. And we've really looked, a lot of the work that's been presented today has been at different scales.
Yeah.
You know, we've talked about a trilateral, just this three national kind of political forum. And the presentations, other presentations are more regional scales, and the science. And of course, all the on-the-ground work that our partners are doing, including in Central America, those ladies from Guatemala, and it's really, really awesome. Any other comments or online? There you go. Thanks, Mike, for sharing that with that. Actually, if you could share the actual sign-up link. Like,
That's the list.
is that the one? Okay,
That's the
perfect.
list.
Perfect, thank you. Claudia, anything else? Okay, great. Okay, perfect.
No, thank you, everyone. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Claudia, for moderating the session. It's been great. Before we wrap up, we have an executives committee meeting starting at 3:45. Anyone here is welcome to stay, even if you're not part of the committee. But we'll be starting.
Drop that word executive.
I know we're gonna talk about dropping that. So there's like two things. We wanna drop the logo and the executive committee name. So there's like 3 or 4 agenda items, and I think if there's other topics that we wanna discuss, I think we have the time for that. But before we wrap it up, any other housekeeping things we wanna mention? Have people been paying out on their food and beer?
Yeah, I think people would keep paying.
Okay. I need to pay.
Acknowledge it.
Yes, please.
So I want to thank everybody for coming and having our first in-person meeting in a long time here at KBO. It means a lot to us, to trust us with this after we've all gotten a little rusty on it. And I really want to, give a special thanks to Elva and Samantha, and Jacob's kind of working in the background here on all of this stuff. I often am like, yeah, it's not that big of a deal to throw a meeting, and it is, and it's a lot, and we threw them right into the deep end. And, but one of the reasons we want to do this is so our staff get to see the broad partnership and how we fit in and get to meet friends old and new and kind of get a context for what we're doing. So I really want to thank them. And then I want to thank Jamie because she provides this cool mentorship in all of this. I promised Jamie she wouldn't be involved in the logistics of the meeting. I think it did a pretty good.
You did a really good job.
But she definitely kept this like kind of container for these guys to get in here and do this for us all. So I just want to thank them. And really want to thank you, Edwin, for your leadership over the last pandemic. It's been a whole new game. And look at how many more people, thanks to you, have been engaged in the Western Working Group through all of this hybrid online stuff. So that's all. I just wanted to be.
It's been really a work of the committee, and I appreciate all the work that we all have put into it. And so it's really interesting. It's my first and my last in-person meeting as the chair. So anyway, I think, thanks again to KBO for hosting us. I know it's a lot of work and we appreciate all the support and Samantha and Tom helping too. So I think we're done unless anybody else has any other comments. We'll regroup in 15 minutes. And thanks for those folks online that joined us. We appreciate it. We're signing off now. Thanks.
Yeah, so let me know if anybody needs help with their receipt building thing.
I do.